Good morning, dear members of parliament, dear colleagues, dear guests. It's my pleasure to open the second workshop within the framework of our component one of our twinning project. So let me introduce a little bit the scope of this workshop and our short-term experts here. So this workshop is the second one from the series of 3 workshops which we are conducting under the framework of the component one, which basically focused on assistance provided to your parliament when it comes to optimization of your rules of procedure and internal structures for effectively tackling increased legislative workload as a result of the implementation of the association agreement and related tasks connected with EU legal approximation. So this workshop will basically build upon the results and key findings of the first workshop, which took place on the 21st of November this year. And this workshop was focused on internal regulation for EU approximation. This current workshop will also be closely interconnected with the third workshop, which will take place in February 2018 and will be focused on the parliamentary administration role in EU-related matters. Let me introduce to you a little bit the title and the scope of this workshop. So the workshop will be dealing with the role and functioning of the parliamentary working bodies in EU-related matters. So it means basically in practice that our aim is to facilitate practically oriented discussion with you on the roles of the committees in the parliament during pre-accession process. So we would like to discuss with you the role of the sectoral standing committees, the role of the European Integration Committee, and the role of the grant committees or councils for European integration. So our experts from 4 national parliaments from EU member states will present their experience with what was the role of their parliamentary committees during pre-accession period, and based on this brief intervention from their side, you will have the possibility to ask questions or to raise remarks and comments and to discuss with them the issues that might be of interest for you. So we would like to share experience with you, we would like to share lessons learned with you, and based on this, our aim is to find out some key conclusions or key findings that might be of interest for you and that might help you at your current stage of your association process. So let me introduce to you our experts here. So I will start from my left side. From the Hungarian National Assembly, we have here our colleague Eva Sekrényes, who is the permanent representative of the Hungarian National Assembly to the European Union. She has 13 years of progressive experience within the European Affairs Department in the Hungarian National Assembly. And currently she is based in Brussels and she is working closely together with the European Parliament. So her task is to monitor the daily work of the European Parliament and to report back to the Hungarian National Assembly what is going on in the European Parliament. So if you will have any question also related to the work of her in relation to the European Parliament, so this is also the right place to ask. From the Slovak National Council, we have here Mrs. Eva Kičinová, who is currently the head of the Secretariat of the Economic Affairs Committee. But for 6 years she was serving also as the director of the European Affairs Department in the National Council of the Slovak Republic, and she was the director of EU Affairs Department exactly during the period, during the pre-accession period of the Slovak Republic to the European Union. She has a 16 years of progressive experience in the Slovak parliament. She used to work also from the research department. From the Czech Chamber of Deputies, we have here Mrs. Darina Neskusilova, who is currently working as a legal advisor at the Department of European Affairs in the Parliamentary Institute of the Czech Chamber of Deputies. The Parliamentary Institute is basically the research service of the Czech Chamber of Deputies. She has 6 years of experience, and also important to mention is that she used to be also the head of EU Affairs Department of the Parliamentary Institute in the Czech Parliament. From Latvian Parliament, we have here Mr. Ilmar Solis, who is the project consultant to the European Affairs Committee with more than 20 years of experience within the parliamentary administration. And what is important to mention in his case is the fact that he has wide-ranging and long-lasting experience with parliamentary development assistance projects in Western Balkans, in Republic of Moldova, Georgia, Armenia, Ukraine, and many other countries in EU's southern and eastern neighborhoods. So let me open the first session of our workshop. Basically, the first session will focus on the roles and responsibilities of parliamentary working bodies in EU-related matters. So based on the brief intervention from our experts, we would like to discuss with you the role of the parliamentary committees when it comes to the political support of the association process, oversight functions over implementation of the association agreement and approximation tasks, and of course a lot of things connected with oversight of the implementation of the work of the government when it comes to the association process. So we will address the questions how the structures and competencies of parliamentary working bodies were modified during pre-accession process in these 4 cases, and we will also examine how parliamentary working bodies addressed approximation of national legislation to the EU acquis. And last but not least, we will also discuss the scope and intensity of the parliamentary oversight over association process in this country. So without any further ado, I would like to give the floor directly to our first keynote speaker, Eva from the Hungarian National Assembly. So please, Eva, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being here. I would like to be as brief as possible, but I would like to show you our process, what we did in the pre-accession phase, and you will see that in which phase, what was the most important body which was created, or where we modified the role of that political body. And I would like to highlight that if I'm not clear enough, please stop me and ask questions, or if you don't want to interrupt me, I will be available here during the questions period, of course, and in the afternoon as well. So in my presentation, in the first part of my presentation, I will concentrate on the role of the Committee on EU Integration. We have had a committee which was called Grant Committee. We used the Finnish example at that time, and this body had a crucial role in the life of the parliament. And in the second part of my presentation, I will talk a little bit about the Hungarian examples of the Joint Parliamentary Committee together with the EP side. So in the pre-accession phase, in the integration process, there are several important participants, such as the government, the different agencies, different stakeholders, the NGOs, the general public as an important element, and of course the parliament. Parliament should oversight the government activities in case of the integration process. So not just the overall oversight activity, but the integration process, regarding the integration process as well. In our case, during the pre-accession period, since the 1990s, the European integration was not a question. We wanted to be part of the European community. Our commitment was sure, and there was a huge political consensus behind this asset. And as well as staff level, as well as political level, we thought that the preparation is a crucial thing. We wanted to be as prepared as possible. So better you prepared, the much you can gain as the members of the European Union. So we did our best, and we realized that the tasks are similar in the pre-accession phase than the tasks during the membership phase. So if you are preparing yourself, so what are the main tasks of the Parliament? The transposition task, of course, the constitutional task, because in case of membership you have to change the constitution as well. The Parliament has a crucial role in informing and involving the general public. The national parliaments are directly elected bodies, and the national parliament has a direct contact with the citizens. So in case of an integration process, which is a crucial in a country's life, the Parliament has to take care of the opinion of the general public, and the Parliament has to inform about the most important questions regarding the country's integration process. I would like to highlight also the interparliamentary tasks of the Parliament. With parliamentary diplomacy, you can help your country's position. You can really help to gain more in the integration process. You can, with the proper parliamentary diplomacy, you can help your government in case of any kind of negotiations with the EU, not just the negotiation process itself, but you have still, you have already have a different kind of contractual relations with the EU. So from the governmental side, you should do your job, but with parliamentary diplomacy you can help to your government, and of course it's very important that the country should have one voice in not just in Brussels but in the overall European Union. I put into my slide scrutiny task and subsidiarity control task, which is completely different when you are a member state. So I just highlighted that the preparations task is quite similar in the pre-accession phase, but of course if you are a member, you will have other tasks as well. As I told you, we had a huge and broad political consensus, and either the government changed. This political consensus was a basis, and no one wanted to breach this political consensus. And in the parliamentary level, we have had several study visits, internship in different national parliaments, and we started to monitor what the other national parliaments are doing, and we wanted to create our own process, and we wanted to create our own bodies, because it's very good and practical to know what the other countries' parliaments, what other national parliaments are doing, but it's much better if you could adapt the different experiences into your own system, and you can create your local version of oversight of the government, how to inform the public, how to involve NGOs, the civil society, and so on and so on. So you should be aware of the different experience of different national parliaments, and you should combine this with your local traditions and local local things, and you should merge these two different different way of thinking. One of the most important tasks of the parliament is the political monitoring of the government's activity. Especially, it will be a huge issue, especially during the negotiations, because as a parliament, you should do a proper oversight activity. What were the main tools in case of Hungary? The core of the oversight activity in case of the European integration was put into the European Affairs Committee. In case of sectoral political issues, of course, the sectoral committees were involved. For example, in case of the agriculture, the coordination was done by the Committee on European Integration, but the Committee on European Integration had to cooperate with the Agricultural Committee. There were several cases when the different committees organized high-level special forums, political debates. During our accession period, the agriculture was one of the most important topic. So we organized several debates about the different aspects of the agricultural policy and the most important things, how to reduce or how to increase the sugar quotas and so on and so on. Of course, in case of political monitoring, you can use the normal parliamentary tools as well, plenary debates, questions, interpellations, and you should find a balance between the secrecy and the transparency, because the parliaments are open institutions. They are close to the citizens. But of course, during the negotiation process, there are lots of sensitive issues, and the government should represent its own interest. And in some cases, the secrecy is a must. So, as far as I know, there were several good debates with involving the general public, the open debates. But if an important decision should be taken, in-camera meetings are very, very useful, because in-camera meetings, politicians can be very, very frank, very very open, and the decision can be made much more easily. Here, in the next slide, please, I did 3 phases of our integration process. The first phase was at the very beginning. At that time, we had the Committee on European Integration, but in 1994, after having the European agreement, which was more or less similar to your association agreement, we created a subcommittee of the association committee, monitor the progress in the law harmonization. And in Hungary, the case is quite special regarding the foreign relations of the parliament, because in 1990 we created an office for foreign relations, and in that office there were a couple of people who were dealing with EU affairs. I will highlight this information later on. In the second phase, the role of the Committee on European Integration increased. That was the core body in case of our integration process. And of course, the administration, the number of administration had been increased, as well as the Secretariat of the Committee on EU integration, as well as the Office for Foreign Relations. There was an EU department created as well under the Office for Foreign Relations. And the last phase was the preparation for the real accession from 1998 till the accession. In 2002, we created the Grand Committee, which I will tell you later on. In that phase, in the last phase, the increased role of the administration was on a set, because the administration had to prepare the politicians and had to prepare the whole process. I don't know how much time do I have. 2 minutes, okay. So maybe I would like to concentrate on the first phase and on the establishment of the Grand Committee. As I told you, there were several study visits and bilateral exchange of views with different national parliaments. And then in the Hungarian National Assembly, a Grand Committee was created in 2002. This is a special body, quite similar to your Parliamentary Council for European integration. It is convened it was convened by the Speaker, and the government was asked to provide information to the parliamentarians. It was a very, very high-level meeting involving the vice speakers, all the vice speakers of the Hungarian National Assembly, all the heads of the political groups of the Hungarian National Assembly, the chairmen of the Committee on European Integration, the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and the Constitutional Committee as well. And it was all the meetings were closed, so it was an in-camera meeting, and it gave the possibility to have a really frank exchange of view between the Parliament and the government. And as far as I told you before, the preparation is very, very important. We still have this kind of forum. After our accession in 2004, the law has been changed and the committee renamed as a consultation forum, but the mechanism is completely the same. What we elaborated during the pre-accession phase, we still have it and we still use it. So now our speaker convened as well the meeting and asked the government to inform the Parliament before the European Council's meeting. I think this was more or less what I wanted to tell you this part. So I will give the floor to Darina. No, Eva, sorry.
Thank you very much for your intervention. From our point of view, I would like to thank you especially for highlighting the necessity of the political consensus, which is really a cornerstone of successful EU association and integration process. And as well as I would like to mention that it is especially really useful that you highlighted the necessity of following best examples from EU member states, which can serve as a basis for the adoption of the mechanisms that are currently in place also here in Moldova. So you mentioned that during your experience, it was useful to combine the best practices from the member states with the local traditions, with emphasis on the oversight function of the parliament. So basically in practice you did a lot of debates, hearings and other oversight related activities. So thank you very much for your intervention, and I would like to give the floor to Eva from the National Council of the Slovak Republic to share the Slovak experience with us. Eva, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm also very glad that I could come here and to share our experience with you. And I would like to continue and in this part of presentation again stress the political aspects of association process and the political and parliamentary oversight over this association process. And that's why I have, we can go to the first slide. Since Slovakia was the country with a special, we had really the special situation during the association, the whole association process, which took altogether 11 years. I have put some milestones there because it's very important from the political point of view, because our country was the only country from all acceding countries which had the real problems with political stability, functioning of democracy and rule of law. According to the progress report of the European Commission, we did not fulfill the political criteria in one period of time. That's why I'm mentioning it in this presentation, because it's very connected with the political support and the political support of the association process, that really we had, and the parliament had to stress that we indeed want to become a member of the European Union, even though there are some reproaches from the side of the European Commission that we are not fulfilling the political criteria. And the parliament had, because Slovakia was excluded from the first group of associated countries, and we had to then catch up the process after 2 years delay. So, and this situation was really very delicate and very embarrassing for our country. And the parliament adopted two important resolutions in that time as a reaction to the European Commission's judgment about Slovakia. And that was the one about the one declaration about the integration of Slovakia to the EU, where the parliament really expressed our adherence and commitment to the values which underpin the EU, that we really want to continue in this integration process. And after these 2 years delays or problems we had, and after the elections, then again Parliament adopted another resolution once it was decided that, okay, let's include Slovakia again to the group of the other countries which will continue with the association and accession procedures. That again there's a political reaction, and the resolution passed by the parliament, where again the parliament settled the objectives and the primary duties of the parliament, in the accession negotiation process. And in this declaration, this is the political declaration, the Parliament declared that it will create a more flexible legislative procedure, also within the constitution, within the laws of the country, that we want to really accelerate the process, to especially concerning the approximation, because we lost really the 2 years' time, and that we want to catch up and keep and put back on track the integration process. And well, so that's just a very general overview how the political consensus in the country, across the whole political spectrum, is really important, is really precondition to successfully accomplish the goal, the aim you settled for yourself, that you once really want to become the member of European Union. And well, we can continue. Concerning the association agreement, of course, there was that obligation about this approximation of legislation settled, and there were adopted 2 resolutions, again, very important political resolutions. One was at the level of the government. It was called the conception of the approximation of laws with the acquis, which settled 3 levels of approximation: ministerial, governmental, and parliamentary level. But you had these discussions about the approximation in more detail during the last meeting 2 weeks ago, so I will not go into the detail. But anyway, we in our country settled also these 3 levels of approximation process. And then you can switch the slide. There was another resolution on the parliamentary level, again concerning the approximation of legislation, but also the overall responsibility of the Parliament in the association integration process. It was the resolution about the main tasks of the Parliament in this process. It was really a very important document because it was the basis for all procedures which followed from these followed in the next years, including the changes of laws, legislation, constitution, and so on. And this resolution basically settled the 3 functions of the Parliament in the pre-accession process. That was the political function, then the oversight function, and the information function of the Parliament. Concerning the political function of the Parliament, as I mentioned, that political consensus was the most important precondition for the successful association process. This political support for this approximation of laws had to be shown internally into the Parliament and all the parliamentary bodies and the office and the administration of the Parliament. That means internally as well externally, as a message towards the government and towards the EU institutions. Because it was very important that the government and the Parliament, they coordinate their activities, they settle the same methodology in order to ensure that the process of approximation is continuous, clear, and effective. So it had to be really the balance, the coordination between the government and the Parliament concerning this approximation. And and this political function also comprised also the administrative measures and but also the personal capacities necessary in order to successfully approximate legislation, but also some material needs, because in that time it was 1996 and 1990s. We did not have that much hardware, software, computers. We did not have the EU law. We had to buy on the CDs the EU the CD-ROMs. Really the acquis communautaire the EU law. We did not have access to information databases. There was not internet to that extent developed. We did not have libraries. We did not have books about the EU law. We did not have translated the text of acquis communautaire. That was really the huge problems we had. And there's a special issue about the translation, but you don't have here as a problem. It is very, very lucky you are, because we had to really translate every single word from the acquis communautaire. It was a big, big problem, but it would be for another extra separate lecture, but I will not be telling about this. So we were in the very, very different situation as you are now. And all this was mentioned in that political declaration resolution of the Parliament that, okay, let's do it, let's find finances, let's hire the people, let's do it all together so that we can really approximate the legislation and try to do our best and try to gather all the resources necessary. This political function was exercised by at the very beginning by the Constitutional Affairs Committee. Then there was established a committee on European integration, and there were also other sectoral committees involved in the process. I will tell you later on how was it divided. And to continue to the oversight or supervisory function of our Parliament, of course, the Parliament had to control. It's basically oversight is the control of the government, and in general terms, the Parliament was controlling the government when it was formulating its approximation task, how it was fulfilling the approximation obligations, and very important, how were the financial instruments and funds used in the governmental level, in the ministries, and of course in the Parliament as well, because we also had some financial instruments used for the parliamentary purposes. So it was the political oversight or control, general control over the government, and basically it meant that the Parliament were discussing in the plenary or in the committee first of all the proclamation of government policies. That means after elections the government sends the proclamation to the Parliament, which had to approve it. Then of course we had this national program for adoption of the acquis communautaire, and it was written for 4 years, and it was once it was revised in our country. And according to the NPAA, the government prepare for every year the legislative work program, and Parliament, the parliamentary working bodies were monitoring how the government fulfills its obligations and the tasks. And the control was oral as well as in written, because the government was sending also the written reports to the plenary, to the committees as well. So this is basically how the oversight function was exercised. And in more concrete control or oversight over the government was the control of if government is elaborating the compatibility clauses and tables of concordance to every piece of legislation, every draft coming to the Parliament, because it was the obligation in the rules of procedure that each draft of law must be accompanied by these compatibility clauses and tables of concordance. But this was controlled in the sectoral committees. Each sectoral committee was controlling the draft each draft which belonged to their competence and the respective minister. It was not a responsibility for European Integration Committee. I will come to that in a minute. Just very briefly, the third function of the Parliament was the information function. That means that the Parliament must be or shall lead general political debate in the country, in your society, on the reasons why you become why you want to become a member of the European Union. The Parliament is responsible to explain to the citizens the advantages, disadvantages of membership, consequences of EU membership. Your members of Parliament must explain to their electorate, to the citizens that the life in the EU is very demanding, and but it's partnership. You have obligations, but you have also the rights, and your citizens will have the rights, but you will be obliged to follow the rules, regulations, etc. So really to explain to the citizens how and why we decided and what will it bring for us to be the full member of the European Union. And as well as the parliamentarians also responsible to create the so-called European image of the country towards, externally, abroad to the institutions, European Union institutions, etc. And so these information function also means that the Parliament also was responsible for providing the complex information about also the EU law, for the members of Parliament, civil servants, general public, etc. So to provide also operational information, comprehensive information, analysis of approximated regulations and information studies. And these will be, but these information functions, all these analyses and informations were not in our case, this was done by the Department for Information Analysis and Legislative Department, but not all the information, this analysis and this complex information was available to public. So we did not have kind of public EU information center. What is maybe I would say this is one lesson learned. What we did not have and could be very practical, and also for the purpose of informing the general public about the EU issues. So this was not a very, I think, very good organized in our Parliament. So really the general public was not that much involved into our information databases, systems, analysis, and so I think that in your Parliament you had it the opposite. So we will see another lesson learned, the positive one. We had more. Not that well, not that positive maybe. And to continue and about the Committee on European Integration, just very brief. As I mentioned, our Committee on European Integration, it was not legislative committee. It did not have the obligation to check each draft of law from the point of view of approximation. It was not the obligatory committee. That means that it was established by the decision of the Parliament, and it had a proportional representation. It was quite big compared to other committees. It had 19 members, and the members of this committee could be members of other committees. What was not the case of the other parliamentary committees. And our committee was, how I wrote there, it was kind of arching over the integration process in the Parliament. So, and it had mainly the monitoring, consultative character. If we continue, you can see it was just deliberating, discussing the overall process of association process, the accession negotiations, and the results of accession negotiations, how the association agreement was implemented, how the national program by the government was implemented, then how the financial use were used, and if they were used properly. The committee was hearing that especially Deputy Prime Minister for European Integration, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the Chief Negotiator for accession of the Slovak Republic to the EU. And and it from time to time it also deliberated and discussed several drafts of legislation, but only those who were politically sensitive concerning the approximation. For example, we had the kind of problems, to say, with the use of minority languages in the public used in public contact with public authorities, or we had sometimes the problems with the Romas, or what else? Some laws or legislation concerning state aid or public procurement, or some kind of very, I can say, the sensitive legislation was also discussed by the European Integration Committee, but it was mostly the these were exceptional cases. And well, and from time to time it initiated also parliamentary surveys, how these, in the public or central public administration bodies, how the financial instruments are used. Well, and I think that it's enough for now. I will stop here, and then in the second presentation I will tell more about this coordination and information of the public about the, well, the integration procedures, etc. Okay, so thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Do you have a question? Okay, so if you have a brief question right now, you can address it right now, please.
Da, vă mulțumesc. Mă numesc Valerian Bejan, deputat. Stimată doamnă Eva, la începutul prezentării dumneavoastră ați specificat că în decembrie 97 Republica Slovacă nu îndeplinea criterii politice, fiind exclusă din așa numitul grup de la Luxemburg al statelor asociate. Puteți să numiți câteva criterii care nu le îndeplinea atunci? Mulțumesc.
Yes, we did not fulfill the political criteria. More concretely, we did not settle the stable institutions, and we did not follow the democracy and rule of law, because after the elections, we had the problems also with the not independent judiciary, the corruption. We did not have transparent civil service. So basically, these were the not functioning, stable institutions, and the rule of law and democracy in general was not how to say, the criteria fulfilled by our country. Well, that was it.
Okay, thank you very much. We will have time for discussion after all presentations and intervention will be done. But if you have any urgent, short question, you can ask also after each presentation. I would like to just sum it up what was mentioned by Eva during her presentation. Based on the Slovak experience, it was necessary to have a proper coordination mechanism between the parliament and the government when it comes to the implementation of the association agreement. So the mechanisms and the concept applicable at the level of the government and at the level of the parliament were compatible to each other, and the parliament and the government shared information on a daily basis. For instance, Eva mentioned that obligation to submit the table of concordance to the parliament was directly enacted in the rules of procedure. So this was a direct obligation for the government that it should submit the draft law together with the table of concordance to the parliament. Eva also highlighted the necessity of building a clear parliamentary message to the EU institutions and to the external actors. So she mentioned that in the Slovak case, it was necessary to introduce parliamentary declarations on the support of the integration process. So this was one of the tools that helped the country to get back on the track when it comes to the EU integration process. And last but not least, Eva highlighted also the oversight over use of pre-accession instruments such as the pre-structural funds, EU funds, FARE, and other funds in practice. So it was the role of the European Integration Committee not only to oversight the implementation of the association agreement, but also to discuss how the EU funds are spent in the country for getting ready for the EU integration process. Now I would like to give the floor to Darina from the Czech Chamber of Deputies to share the Czech experience with us. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning. I would like to thank you again for coming to our workshop. So my presentation will focus to the main challenges that the Czech Republic were facing during its pre-accession process. These challenges have already been mentioned also by my colleagues, as I think that all the parliaments somehow are facing these challenges. It is the establishment of specialized parliamentary working bodies like the Committees for European Integration. It was the oversight, cooperation with the government, law approximation, and the legislative process in case of EU bills. At the beginning, I just prepared for you a table that you can see on the screen. It is about the Czech Parliament committee's engagement in the EU affairs matters, because in our parliament the EU-related tasks was mainly concentrated to the committee, so the plenary did not deal with them so much in a consistent and regular manner. And at the very beginning, in 1993, it was the Committee on Foreign Affairs of the Chamber of Deputies that dealt with the EU-related affairs. The Senate was not yet established. We had a monocameral system at that time, so it was only in the Chamber of Deputies. Then from 1996 to 1998, it was already after the Czech Republic officially applied for a full membership in the EU. This happened in 1996. So the Committee on Foreign Affairs dealt with European agenda a little bit more, but not that much yet at the beginning. And the Senate was established at 1996, so there has been also the Senate Committee on Foreign Affairs, and it is interesting that this committee had a subcommittee on European integration. And actually this subcommittee on European integration served a little bit as a base then for the committees on European integration that has been established in 1998 in both chambers. So I mean like from the procedural and organizational point of view, like statutes and so on. Then when these committees on European integration have been established, they dealt with the compatibility of with the issues of compatibility of laws with EU law, but at the same time the sectoral committees dealt with the same bills, but from the material point of view. So actually both this type of committees dealt with legislative proposal, and also the members of the Committee on European Integration might have been at the time members of some other sectoral committee, like for example Economic Committee, Budgetary Committee, because it is not always possible to separate these two aspects, like compatibility with EU law and other material aspects. Then I will come to the oversight of the government by the Chamber of Deputies in general. So next slide, please. As I have already mentioned, the plenary rather did not deal with this issue systemically. It dealt with some government reports because government published some reports, for example, in reaction to the Commission's report on progress of the Czech Republic in the EU accession and so on. But the plenary dealt with these reports rather on demand if some MPs were interested in some aspects of it, or if maybe after the Copenhagen summit when it was finally decided that the Czech Republic will be admitted to the EU. So it was rather random. And then the parliamentarians could, of course, use some general tools for the oversight of the government, like, for example, EU-related interpellation. The interpellations may be, of course, used in any matters, and so it could also concern some EU-related topics. It was in our country, it was obvious that the opposition MPs made some efforts to more oversight the government during the negotiations process. There were some attempts to adopt some resolution, for example, that they were not fully satisfied with some government's steps, but their proposals usually did not have enough support. So it was rather concentrated in the Committee on European Integration that, as I have already said, have been established in 1998 2008, it had 17 members. It was rather a middle-sized committee in the Czech Republic, as the smallest one have usually 10 to 15 members, and the biggest one had 25 to 30, for example, budgetary committee or some very important committees. It was the same as Eva has mentioned for Slovakian case, that there were no special provisions about the committee in the Act on the Rules of Procedure at the beginning. So it had exactly the same position and the same powers and competencies like any other committee, and only upon the decision of the constituent general meeting it was established, because according to the Act on the Rules of Procedure of the Czech Republic, there are listed some committees that have to be mandatorily established at the beginning of each election term, and at that time the Committee on European Integration was not mentioned in this list. In this committee, members were proportionally, all the political parties were proportionally represented in this committee, and its meetings were generally open to the public. The main tasks of the Committee on European Affairs were, however, legislative in our countries. It performed so-called preliminary consultations. I think that my colleague Martin Kavina maybe already told you something about that. It was based on the decision of the government that all the draft bills, it was draft bills, it was not bills yet, because it took place already before the draft bill were submitted to the meeting of the government for approval. So it was not yet government bill, it was a draft bill, which approximated Czech laws to EU law, and it was submitted to the committee already in pre-parliamentary phase of the legislative procedure. This means it was submitted to the parliament for debates, and the committee was supposed to assess the compatibility of this draft law with EU law. And if there has been any incompatibility identified by the committee, then the meeting takes place with the representative of the responsible ministry, with the chairman of the committee, with the reporter of the committee that has been appointed for each particular draft. And the issues were discussed then, and maybe it could have been explained that, for example, there was not incompatibility, it was maybe not properly understood, or to explain why the draft law contained provisions that it contained. And the purpose of this procedure was like to enable us to smoothly pass the bills that approximated Czech laws to EU law, because there was obviously the need to somehow speed up legislative procedure in case of this approximation law. Then oversight of the government, the committee also, as Eva mentioned, for the Slovakian case, regularly invited chief negotiator of the Czech Republic for accession of the EU, invited the ministers. So the screening and negotiations were discussed. But however, the committee did not adopt any resolutions. So it was discussed, but the committee did not give, for example, some opinions or instructions to the government how it should proceed during negotiations. It was rather that the committee has been informed, and of course debate takes place, but it did not adopt any resolution, I mean, on these proceedings of the government. The committee also involved in international cooperation, but about this I will tell you more in details probably in the second part of the workshop, because it is more relevant for this part. And it did oversight of the implementation of communication strategy. I will also tell you more in the second part. The committee also dealt with the progress reports of the Commission and of the government. This was these regular reports on the progress published by the Commission on the Czech Republic, because, as I have told you, the plenary did not deal with this report. So it was really regularly and systematically followed on the level of the Committee on European Integration. And about the parliamentary diplomacy, EP observers and COSAC, I will tell you also in the second part. Then I have prepared for you a case study, or I would like to tell you about one case of the directive that has been, to which the Czech laws have been approximated in pre-accession period. It was in 1999, it was the directive on package travel, package holidays and package tours. And actually the legislative proposal that have been submitted, its goal was primarily not approximation, but several travel agencies in the Czech Republic went to bankruptcy, and following this, a bill was submitted to a parliament to deal with this issue. But as there was a directive on the European level, they already tried to approximate our laws to this directive as well. And there was an issue that the directive said that the travel agency has to assure that the clients are repatriated in case of bankruptcy, and also the money had to be refunded to them for the services which have not been provided. And our legislators considered that the refund of money is not really, full refund of money is not really necessary, because there would be some inequality between also the fields of business, because in other fields of business it is not necessary to do the full refund if there is a bankruptcy. And so they wanted to consider whether we can adopt a law which would only assure for a repatriation of clients, but not for a full refund of funds. And so the compatibility assessment have to be made, whether it is possible. And can you please switch the slide? And we used the methodology. Actually, the Committee on European Integration dealt with this bill and submitted 5 proposals for amendment. This was a recommendation to the plenary. This resolution had a consultative recommendation character to the plenary, and the directive must be interpreted in order to know whether we can adopt it without assuring for refund or not. And this was done by the expert of the Center for European Law of the Parliamentary Institute of the Research Service, because they were providing expert supports to the committee members. So in this case, the preamble must be used, so that we have to look at the preamble if it contains any explanatory statements, for example, how to interpret the provisions of the directive. And sometimes the directive itself contain the articles on whether the less stringent or more stringent regulation can be adopted. And actually this directive contained the Article 8 saying that the countries can adopt more stringent regulations, but not less. And generally also in case of consumer protection, now in the Treaty on the Functioning of the EU, it is written that the countries may adopt more strict rules, but not less. So we concluded that it would not be possible to adopt this law being in a breach with the directive. And there were also been some consideration that we are not yet the member of the European Union, because it was in 1999, and the Czech Republic, acceded in 2004. So some MPs argued that maybe we could amend this law later, for example, in 2002 or 2003, to be fully compatible with the EU law, because at the time that they did not find it reasonable to adopt such a regulation. But however, finally it was adopted to be fully compatible with the EU directive. So now I would like to tell you something about the legislative proceeding of EU relevant bills, because the rules of procedure has been amended by the Act number 47 from 2000, and I like to speed up the legislative procedure. And the specific legislative procedure has been introduced, that the law could be adopted already at the conclusion of first reading. So no second or third reading would take place. However, this procedure, this amendment has been adopted, and we still have it in the Act on the Rules of Procedure, but it is not practically it is not used for the EU-relevant bills, and it has never been used. It was proposed to be for EU-relevant bills, but during the legislative deliberations about this amendment, it was amended in a way that this procedure can be used for any act, but the reasons for asking for this procedure must be done in explanatory memorandum. For example, now it is used when the election term is going to end and the legislative procedure would not be able to finish on time, so it is proposed to do only one reading of the bill in order to be able to adopt on time. So finally, we had no specific system for implementation EU law because this amendment was general, and the legislative procedure was speed up like by the political agreement that no delays will generally be undertook during this legislative procedure. Just to end my presentation, I gave you a little bit of statistics. So in the third election term, we had overall 426 government bills, and of this we had 177 EU-relevant bills. And from these 177 EU-relevant bills, we had 198 adopted and 409 non-adopted. So you can see that not all the EU-relevant bills had to be adopted. To give you an example of the bill that has not been adopted, it was, for example, a draft on the Act on excise duties, because this amendment to this act has been submitted to the Parliament only 7 days after the previous amendment came into force. And so, yes, the MPs did not really feel the need to amend this law again after such a short period. So this law was just denied. So it could also be denied in some cases. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention. Based on what we heard in the Slovak case and in the Czech case, we can see that there's obvious the difference between these two approaches. So in the Slovak case, the European Integration Committee was not a legislative committee and was not applying the compatibility checks over the draft laws. So the EU approximation tasks were done by the sectoral committees in the Slovak case, and the European Integration Committee was just making a monitoring of this whole process in the Slovak Parliament. But the different approach was applied in the Czech case, where the European Integration Committee was a legislative committee, so it was directly involved in compatibility checks of the draft laws. So basically you can see these two approaches that were in place in the member states when setting up the role of the European Integration Committee, either as a legislative committee or as a non-legislative committee, ensuring the monitoring role of the approximation tasks in the Parliament. And last but not least, I would like to give the floor to Ilmars to share with us the experience from the Latvian Parliament. Ilmars, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure again to be here in the renovated parliamentary buildings this time, and having all of you participating in so big numbers. Really, I'm very, very surprised positively if comparing with other countries I'm working sometimes. So I will do some short summary and comparison between the parliaments, because we have heard, every parliament had the EU Integration Committee. In Latvian case, we called it European Affairs Committee from very beginning. So, and if we can have the first slide, so we can see the main dates. It took for us a bit less than 10 years to join the EU. So the process we started in 1995. This is when European Affairs Committee was established. Already 2 years after that, the Parliament established the EU Information Center. So we were the first Parliament among applicant countries to establish the EU Information Center. So gradually it grew bigger, and we were, the center was at its most peak of operations during the accession referendum. So it was much larger than the government EU Information Center. So, and then, what is important according to the dates, what we can see here is amendments to the rules of procedure of the Parliament, which were adopted in 2001, regulating the role of European Affairs Committee and the role of the Parliament in the EU integration. So I should mention, however, that it took about 3 years to develop 5 articles in the rules of procedure. It's not an easy process. The rules of procedure in our case is also a law, so we have to have consensus in order, I mean political consensus. Of course you can vote even without a consensus, but then it's risky. First we had to develop, let's say, kind of compromised agreement based on best EU experiences with very, very few articles, but let's say 3 years for 3 to 5 articles, that's what's very challenging issue. Then for the next slide, before going to the next slide, I will try to summarize what was specific for Latvia during accession process. All political parties adopted declaration that they support EU integration already in 1995. So politically and technically there were never a debate, should we join the EU or not. So it was rather clear. The debate was more or less how we should do it and when. Secondly, rules of procedure of the Parliament have had, since 2001, a requirement that all drafts submitted to the Parliament should contain so-called annotation. So in your case it would be explanatory note or whatever, so this feature is called differently. But we also added basic list of the questions to be answered. For example, why the law is needed, what is the level of approximation, and if annotation was not attached to the draft, it was not even reviewed with the Parliament procedure, because if it doesn't contain necessary information, then it is considered not to be eligible even to start the procedure. The government, on the other hand, had really detailed regulations how to develop this explanatory note, concordance tables, etc. So the first step is actually was adopt amendments to the rules of procedure setting such requirement. And then it's up to the government actually how they do internally. Still, even now, the main issue with this explanatory notes remains what happens with the drafts proposed by members of Parliament. So it can be very vague, just telling there is no relation with the EU, no impact on the budget. And even until now, it is very difficult to solve this issue. But what is important that the government laws submitted to the Parliament were accompanied with explanatory note. This was a must for them, and it was very useful for us as, let's say, staffs of EU Affairs Committee, and especially staffs of sectoral committees and members of these committees to understand which directive is transposed by this law, or is there any directive transposed. Otherwise, it takes really a lot of time to understand, is this law related to EU integration, and to find a proper EU legal source, either regulation or directive. It was a mission impossible without really having web-based databases at that time. You can imagine to go to the government library, it would take really weeks to find out. Another feature, so Latvia is parliamentary republic. So, giving, at least by constitution, quite strong role to the parliament, to the legislative process, and this was similarly applied to the EU integration. So after studying several examples, so we came to conclusion that the parliament should play some role in the EU integration, and the best examples we found in Scandinavia, namely the Danish, the Finnish, and the Swedish example. Of course, in Austria you also have a bit similar, so-called mandatory system, which means that the European Affairs Committee gives a mandate to the government. In our case, we started to use this mandate during accession negotiations. Before agreeing anything with the government, with the EU institutions or member state, the government has to seek for the mandate from European Affairs Committee. And European Affairs Committee therefore represented the point of view of the whole Parliament, and because of that we had to have proportional representation. However, the plenary may decide otherwise. So let's say mandate is given by the European Affairs Committee unless the plenary decides otherwise. So there were never a case when the plenary decided otherwise through the whole process of EU integration. Another specific feature is that EU Affairs Committee was legislative committee. Formally, we could initiate laws. The committee could initiate laws or propose amendments. So in that terms, we were equal to any others, but we were never a responsible committee. Technically, the committee could be a responsible committee, but the Bureau of Parliament, let's say, assigns the responsible committee, which is later decided by the plenary, but we never asked to be assigned as a leading committee. Either we chose the option to have this monitoring role. Often, however, in the cases when the draft law was having high importance for EU integration, the committee may propose some amendments, but never initiated a new draft law. A specific role of the legal department, that's another feature from Latvian EU integration experience. So, the legal department normally within an ordinary legislative committee is following every draft law. And one or two legal specialists are assigned to every of the drafts. If it's more significant, for example, like new labor law, for example, there could be two legal specialists assigned. And due to this specific role, it was informal, and during informal discussions between EU Affairs Committee and the leadership of the Parliament and leadership of the legal department, namely with the director of the legal department, it was decided that legal department should be assigned this compatibility check role. Firstly, checking the quality of the laws proposed by the government. Secondly, the drafts initiated by members of Parliament. But moreover, it was needed for checking the amendments proposed by members of Parliament for the second and for the third reading. Because government at that time had very limited capacities to check the amendments for the second and the third reading. But on the other hand, it was a very lengthy process. Firstly, it took about 2 years to train the legal specialists, and we started with the language training. So some of staff, they were trained in English, some of them were trained in French, some of them in German. Otherwise, if you cannot, in your case, it's a bit more easier. You read Romanian source of law. In Latvian case, it wasn't yet available. And in this way, the division of tasks between sectoral committees, European Integration, European Affairs Committee and Legal Department was put in that way that all technical checks were responsibility of the legal department. The European Affairs Committee really did not have any technical capacity to check every individual draft, while sectoral committees did not have skills necessary to check the drafts. So in this way, EU Affairs Committee was also coordinating working together with the government in order to ensure that the drafts submitted to the Parliament and in the legislative process in the Parliament are checked as to compatibility with EU law. Another feature was that in Latvia traditionally there is a good cooperation spirit between the Parliament and the government, both at political and staff level. Staff of the Parliament have had and still have access to all governmental databases, being it is e-portfolio of the government or specific legislative databases related to EU integration. That was never a question, should we be given access or not. It was given as a granted. If government officials have access to particular databases, then the Parliament officials must have, because how we could deal with the draft if we don't see the history, what happened at the side of the government. So we didn't want to start everything from the process from the beginning when we receive the draft. So sometimes the same as in Moldova, you also are participating as staffs in working groups, but if you don't have access to database, then it's kind of a bit strange situation. And involvement of civil society and transparency was another important feature during EU integration process. The committee meetings were always open, unless it was something very specific, which we did not want that the European partners would eventually know in advance. So we have a so-called legislative tracking system established since, I think, 20 years, so it's available on the internet. Also, the laws related to European integration was always available. So as much transparency as you have in cooperation with civil society and the government, as better as the quality of law is. Of course, sometimes we can imagine that involvement of civil society will, in a sense, be, let's say, slowing down adoption of certain policy document or a law, but it's better to do it before the adoption, or not after adoption. And the last specific issue what I wanted to mention actually is European EU Information Center, as what I already mentioned, but their role, especially in the legal approximation, because we use the EU Information Center as a source for members of parliament and parliamentary committees, as well as legal department, to find the EU law and to do comparative analysis. Unfortunately, the Labour and Research Department was not immediately capable to cope with this work, while the staffers of EU Info Office were trained in EU legal databases, other EU law databases, different EU information sources, and they served as very important source of information for both members and committees. And now I will briefly run through the presentation. What are the main players? What were the main players? Of course, it's the plenary as a final decisive forum of members of parliament and legislature. The speaker played a significant role, of course. The bureau, also called presidium of the parliament, was important. Standing committees, European Affairs Committee, EU Information Center, Legal Bureau, and Joint Parliamentary Committee. In my presentation, I will not go into details about the standing committees, only to mention that, of course, the draft, the EU-related legislation and oversight in terms of sectoral policies are done by sectoral committees. But in our case, we try to use these joint committee meetings, joint hearings, public debates as a joint forum with sectoral committees. The EU Affairs Committee has never enough knowledge about all sectors, and therefore it was advisable and better, at least in our case, to have joint committee meetings if we were aiming to debate like important EU policy. Then what is important in the next slide, I will explain you the legal basis. So as mentioned before, it took 2 to 3 years to adopt these few articles. Finally, we managed in 2001, actually with also EU project assistance. We did not have many EU projects, neither other donor projects. We had only 3 very targeted assistance projects, so-called FAR. For us it was EU FAR program, and these were 3 small framework contract projects, which means under 300,000. One was aimed for capacity building for EU Affairs Committee, one was aimed for capacity building for EU Information Center, and the last one was aimed for capacity building for the legal department of the parliament. This was it. Of course, we used intensively TAIEX and maybe some other offers, but we did not have specific large EU integration-related projects to assist the parliament. So, and you can read the articles, and this is it. What it says that parliament participates in EU affairs through European Affairs Committee. So the committee has proportional representation, and it gives mandate to the government. Another article says that there is a strategy to be developed by the parliament on annual basis and presented, by the government, and with the aim to be presented either to European Affairs Committee or to the plenary. And this EU integration annual strategy served as a basis for EU debates in the plenary. So it is still the practice that we have foreign and EU debates once a year. And European Affairs Committee plays a significant role in the preparation and organization of such debates. Another legal basis what we use for EU scrutiny and oversight is provisions of constitution and provisions of the rules of procedure that any parliamentary committee or members of parliament can request information from the government, and government is obliged to submit such information. There is no difference with Moldova or any other country presented here. But just to underline that these provisions were used also for EU scrutiny. If we needed some EU-related information, we didn't need to have some specific regulation about EU-related information. So we use a general rule that the government is obliged to provide information. Another legal provisions were very clearly stipulating that the representatives of European Affairs Committee are participating in observatory capacity in all coordinative bodies of the government which are dealing with EU integration. So at that time it was Council for European Integration, Council of Senior Officials, and some smaller working bodies. We didn't need to ask any permission from a minister or other government officials. So it was given by these rights were given by the law that we have right to participate if we consider it necessary. And even chair of the EU Affairs Committee was a member of accession negotiation delegation, which is quite rare experience, at least at that time. So now I will briefly list, I think I will take some 2 or 3 minutes, the main tasks of European Affairs Committee. Firstly, it was monitoring of the government. And we used as a monitoring tool the National Program for EU Integration, also called the key adoption. Secondly, the committee did coordinate approximation process, but very rarely we focused on particular laws. Committee focused on particular laws in case if they are very of urgency or high relevance or importance. And the committee served also as secretariat for Latvia EU Joint Parliamentary Committee. We did also monitor at that time the EU assistance and other donor assistance provided to Latvia, but with a focus on EU integration. Then the committee did coordinate trainings for staffs, MPs, when needed, and at very early stage, committee also did serve as main EU information provider. So let's go to the next slide. Committee secretariat was responsible also for TAIEX and relations with the European Parliament, but that would be a topic for the part 2. The next slide, please. EU-Latvia Joint Parliamentary Committee, I will address these issues in the second part of presentation since we are running short of time, and now few issues to be mentioned about SIMA EU Information Center. Here you can read the main tasks and the main activities of the center, but there are several issues what I wanted to mention. Firstly, the center was created to satisfy the needs of members of parliament and parliamentary committees. But when the center reached certain capacities, the decision was taken that it should go also public. So to serve the needs for EU-related information of the general public. And it became very, very active, even having hotline services 24 hours a day. Citizens could call to the EU Information Center and ask any type of the questions, and they could get an answer within 24 hours. So it did publish also Euro newsletter for the Parliament, which was disseminated to the regional offices of municipalities or regional libraries. It did also quite a lot information providing activities for the central newspapers and regional newspapers in Latvia. So it is, however, a bit separate topic about EU information, but what I wanted to underline that if the Parliament has this political will and technical means, it is not extremely difficult. You can do well you can do a good job also informing general public, and this is actually a task of the Parliament, especially in the EU accession process. After that, this task is somehow diminishing because also the mass media becomes more professional in this respect. The next slide, please, about transposition of the EU law. The main issues what I want to mention is the key role lies within the sectoral committees and legal department. EU Affairs Committee did mostly coordination and monitoring tasks. And here I would like to stop and leave some room for the questions.
Thank you very much. Just to briefly summarize what was mentioned by Ilmars as a cornerstone of the association and integration process was the declaration of the political parties to support the EU association and integration process as a cornerstone of the whole process, that in order to reach the political consensus necessary for association and integration process. Ilmars also mentioned that in the Latvian case it was also inevitable to establish a clear legal basis for clear and good cooperation between the parliament and the government. It was done through the constitution and through the rules of procedure enactments that ensure the information right of the parliament and the cooperation between the parliament and the government in practical terms. And what is to be highlighted, of course, is the specific role of EU Information Center, which was emphasized by Ilmars at the end of this presentation. So now I would like to open the discussion. So we would like to hear your remarks, comments, questions. So we have 15 minutes for discussion. So please, if you have any questions, remarks. Yes, please.
Da, mulțumesc. Întrebarea mea este către doamna Darina. În prezentarea dumneavoastră ați vorbit despre faptul că în anul 2000, printr-un amendament al regulamentului Camerei Deputaților, a fost adoptată o procedură legislativă specială cu o aplicație generală pentru accelerarea procesului legislativ. Deci este vorba despre adoptarea proiectelor de lege într-o singură lectură. Clar că acest amendament la regulamentul Parlamentului a influențat pozitiv la mărirea vitezei de adoptare a legilor, dar cum a influențat calitatea legilor respective și când aveau posibilitate deputații de a interveni cu anumite propuneri de îmbunătățire a proiectelor de legi. Mulțumim!
Yes, so actually this procedure has been used very rarely, and it has not really been used in the EU-relevant laws, but I don't think it would impact negatively on the quality of laws, because actually the MPs are allowed to submit amendments in the Czech Republic, and they could submit these amendments also in EU-relevant laws, and sometimes it was rather it influenced rather in a negative way the compatibility of law with the EU law. You know, the amendments submitted during the legislative process. In case of EU-related laws, it was usually used in less than 10 cases. So I don't think it could really influence the quality of laws. And it is supposed to be like in exceptional cases, and the reasons for that must be done in the explanatory memorandum, and then the plenary meeting votes on it, whether the law can be approved in this procedure or not. And if it is not approved, then the standard legislative procedure takes place. So the second and third readings also. So.
Okay, any other questions or remarks to all of experts? Yes, please.
Mulțumesc, bună ziua tuturor. Mă numesc Petru Cosoi, deputat, și vreau să vin cu o precizare, dar nu înainte de a mulțumi celor prezenți și celor care ne prezintă acest forum și să le mulțumesc în continuare pentru prezența lor și ajutorul pe care ne-l fac Republicii noastre. În anul 1980, fiind student, am avut un referat despre funcționarea blocului politico-militar estic, foarte puternic, creat în fosta URSS, Imperiul Sovietic, și care avea scopul de a contrapune blocului NATO. Menționez că astăzi, aici, alături de noi, sunt țările care au făcut parte din acest bloc, numai că Cehia și Slovacia era în formatul unit Cehoslovacia. Mă bucur că astăzi sunt alături de noi și vreau să menționez în acest context că am făcut o constatare că Cehia, Slovacia și Letonia au parcurs un drum diferit pentru a adera la Uniunea Europeană. Slovacia a menționat că problemele lor s-au cufundat în stabilitate. Aceleași probleme le are și Republica Moldova, în stabilitate. Și nu în zadar am menționat că am făcut parte din acest bloc foarte mare, unde superior era Rusia, care și astăzi se menține superioară în fostul spațiul sovietic. Unica și cea mai importantă frână este și la noi stabilitatea, creată de aceleași forțe care au fost și în țările baltice și chiar și în Slovenia. De aceea, forumul de astăzi are o menire destul de importantă și eu, prin intermediul acestui forum, rog toți partenerii noștri care ne ajută să ne apreciem în direcția aceasta europeană, să fie cât mai practici în tot ce fac pentru noi și să monitorizeze mai adânc situația din Republica Moldova și atunci cred că o să ne înțeleagă mai bine unde se ascund frânile de aderare la Uniunea Europeană, pentru că noi am trecut și cei 11 ani, dacă luăm că prima intenție a fost în 2005. Vă mulțumesc frumos și vă rog să aveți tot respectul nostru.
Thank you very much for your nice words to our project and to our event and to our experts. So maybe if experts would like to add something to this comment, if you wish, or maybe we can proceed to another question or comment. So if you have any other questions or comments, please feel free to ask or to comment on the presentations. Yes, please, the question.
Mutnaru Constantin, Comisia Politică Externă. După cum observăm, procesul de armonizare a legislației în țările reprezentanții cărora astăzi sunt aici au durat în jur de 10 ani, deci o perioadă destul de lungă. Pe mine mă interesează aspectul legat de metodologia armonizării. Și întrebarea este adresată către toți reprezentanții, dacă în țările dumneavoastră există o metodologie a armonizării și în care acte este ea materializată. Întrebarea mea intervine în contextul în care în Republica Moldova a fost adoptată și urmează a fi publicată și să intre în vigoare noua lege cu privire la actele normative, în care sunt evidențiate anumite aspecte ceea ce ține de armonizare, dar unele aspecte de armonizare le avem transpuse și în anumite hotărâri de guvern. De aceea mă interesează la dumneavoastră unde și cum se regăsește această metodologie a armonizării. Aceasta este prima întrebare. Și a doua întrebare este legată de funcționarea Comisiei Politică Externă și Integrare Europeană în țările noastre, în contextul în care la diferite țări văd că este diferit, întâlnim Comisia pentru Afaceri Europene, Comisia pentru Armonizare, Marea Comisie, deci sunt mecanisme diferite. A fost și la noi abordat subiectul delimitării Comisiei Politică Externă, astfel încât afacerile europene, deci toți cei ce țin de integrare europeană să fie o platformă, iar cei ce țin de politica externă a țării să fie o altă platformă. Ce părere aveți dumneavoastră despre aspectul respectiv?
Thank you very much for your questions. I would like all of you to ask to answer. So we will start with Eva and Hungarian experience in this regard.
So regarding your second question, the mechanisms and the role of the Committee on EU Integration are quite different, but something was common, that was the political consensus that we wanted to be the members of the European Union, and sorry, I cannot follow.
So maybe in the meantime, if we can Eva ask to answer the question on whether it is necessary to, establish a separate EU integration committee and how the methodology of EU approximation was done in practice.
Well, okay, thank you. To your first question, you really need to have settle the methodology in the laws. We have it even in the Constitution, then the rules of procedure, and the special act on the law on governmental decrees or orders of the government, because this is very important task. You just cannot do it on the level of resolution, declarations, or whatever. You really have to have it in your, at least the laws. And we have it in the Constitution before, because we decided, we had that special case with that kind of 2 years handicap or delay, and we wanted to speed up the approximation process, and we have to introduce into our legal system the so-called the approximation decrees of the government. You were told about this by my colleague 2 weeks ago. That means that our government got the special prerogative powers to issue these decrees, which were put on the level of the laws of the parliament, which is a special interference into the general legal order of each democratic country, because there are the constitutional laws of parliament, decrees, resolution, etc., etc. And since we wanted the government to have this power, this prerogative power to issue the decrees with the power of the law, we had to we had to regulate it on the level of the Constitution, because and that was the first amendment of the Constitution. And then it was the special act on governmental decrees of, but only concerning this approximation legislation, and it is still used in these days, because there are still a lot of technical norms which need not necessarily be adapted at the level of the parliament. And well, there are special procedures. I don't know if you have enough time to discuss about it. We can discuss how it works in practice later on. And then, of course, the rules of procedure, which is the act of parliament, binding also for the government, for all actors, where is settled that really each draft coming to the Parliament has to be accompanied by the compatibility clause and tables of concordance. Otherwise, you will not make the government be obliged to send it to your Parliament. And
I immediately respond to your comment, because here we actually are talking about two different issues. One is that really in Constitution it should be separated, the powers of the legislator and of the government. Let's say the exclusive competence of the Parliament is usually state budget and tax laws, etc. So, but here we are, I think your question was more related to the technical requirements to the draft laws and the procedures. Is it correct? Not the competences of the Parliament and the government, because it's a different topic in which law, let's say, directive is to be transposed. And here, I think we don't need to go into details because it's a separate discussion. So normally in Constitution, it says exclusive competences of Parliament, and if the Parliament, by the law, in Latvian case and in average case in EU country, I think if the Parliament wants to delegate some legislative powers, so then you can delegate it to the government and you can say the government should adopt the sub-laws. But what is really important is to understand that now we are speaking about procedure and instructions how to firstly draft the law, so it's about legal drafting, and then how to approximate the laws, which are, again, it's not one issue. So requirements for the legal drafting and for legal approximation, these are two separate issues. Of course, when you approximate the law, it should be in line with the general requirements of the law drafting. But the procedures can be a little bit, I mean, how to draft. This is what is missing in some countries. I don't know in Moldova how it is now. But in Latvia, this was missing. But just to make it clear, it is regulated by the guidelines which are approved by the Cabinet of Ministers. And of course, Parliament was consulted. You don't need to put, in some countries I can observe this typical mistakes that all the procedure and technical requirements are regulated by the law. You cannot regulate everything by the law. Law, it's not instruction. You should have, we had to have guidelines as how to draft the law and how to approximate. But you cannot put everything in the law. So in addition to these guidelines, we have also templates, let's say, for annotation, for concordance tables. I wouldn't really suggest to put it in the law, because with the moving closer to the EU, the approximation tasks may change a little bit. And then you would need to change the law or the rules of procedure of the Parliament, which is like impossible task. While if it is the guidelines approved by the Cabinet of Ministers, let's say government, or even by decision of the Bureau of Parliament, or by decision of Parliament. So the guidelines you can change as often as it is needed. So therefore, we decided to have this general clause, okay, annotation is needed, but let's leave the details to the government, because Parliament has no capacity, let's say, to follow up all developments in the EU, how to transpose the EU law. Let's say with Lisbon Treaty, even the source of law changed. It's not anymore like only directive or regulation. In the past, it was very easy. You know, directive normally should be adopted by the law, if it's not technical one. If it's regulation, okay, let's see. And when you enter in the EU, so then regulations by default are losing the power. I mean, these laws which were aimed to transpose the regulations, that was a huge issue. I mean, which we couldn't really understand which laws and the Cabinet of Ministers regulations were adopted in order to transpose the EU regulations. So that was a specific working group created, which worked at least 1 year just to make the list. Which of the legal acts will lose their power as to 1st of May in 2004. And simply we should be really clear, do we speak about separation of powers or do we speak about technical requirements? So the issue is extremely complicated, and if it's somehow misunderstood, then we have a problem.
Yeah, and Olaf wanted to comment something.
Thank you. Since I'm not technically a twinning expert, but some of you might know that my country is not sitting there. So to give a very concrete and brief answer, in our case, for example, there is the non-technical requirements, for the legal drafts. And this part that concerns the acquis is in there. But specifically addressing your question, we have our Ministry of Justice developed in, I think, 2000 and later 2002 methodology for harmonization and approximation. I can, well, interested, I can send it to you. It's well, public, but you have to find it. And I know for a fact that my colleagues from the Ministry of Justice, I mean Estonian one, they also provided the same document to your this legal approximation center under the Ministry of Justice. So it shouldn't be anything new to it. But if you're interested, I can send it. So it's well, maybe of use. Thank you.
I would like to add even one more comment after Olaf's intervention, so that the same methodology should be used by every law drafter. That's the point. That in some cases we observe that different projects, different advisors, they would propose you different methodologies, but it is up to you really to say, okay, these ones will be applied widely at national level, will be distributed to all legal departments of ministries, to the parliament lawyers, and to everyone, and say, from now on, this is the methodology.
And Eva wanted to comment.
And to comment to your second question, the Committee on European Integration, Committee on Foreign Affairs, combination, two separate committees. We had two separate committees in the Slovak Parliament, and we still have. The Committee on European Integration was established later on. First, we had the Committee on Foreign Affairs. We had from the beginning, and the Committee on Foreign Affairs dealt mainly with the foreign issues in more general, not particularly the integration issues, even though there were many joint committee meetings of the European Integration Committee and Foreign Affairs Committee, but their agenda was a little different, and really the Integration Committee dealt with the integration, accession procedures, etc., and the Foreign Affairs dealt with international treaties, UN issues, OEC issues, kind of other more broad foreign affairs issues, not only particularly the integration. So that was the case in our parliament.
Thank you very much. I think we can continue with this discussion after the break. So basically we will start the second session with a continuation on a discussion whether it is really necessary to establish a separate EU integration committee or the issues can be dealt in any other way. So now I would like to invite you for a coffee break, 15 minutes coffee break. So it means that 11:05 we will meet here to discuss these issues and then to continue with the second session. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, let us continue with our workshop. As agreed before, we would like to continue the discussion on whether it is necessary to establish a separate EU integration committee or the things can be dealt in a joint committee where the EU affairs and foreign affairs are merged together. So this question was already answered by Eva Kicinova from the National Council of the Slovak Republic, that in the Slovak case they established the separate EU integration committee. And now I would like to ask Ilmars, how was this done in practice in the Latvian case, please?
Thank you. Well, the answer is very clear. It's better to have separate committees due to two very important reasons. In the case of active phase of EU integration, which Moldova is now, the tasks of the committees are absolutely different. This is one thing. Another thing is that the procedures decisions are taken in EU affairs and legislative, let's say, approximation area, and foreign affairs, which mainly task is to ratify international treaties, or let's say to make hearings of the ambassadors and provide your opinion. This is absolutely different tasks. It's a bit surprising that coming first time here about 15 years ago, then 10 years ago, so the issue is the same. Should the parliament have two committees or one? It's very clear, two committees. If you are aiming getting closer to EU, because Committee of EU Integration has very concrete tasks: monitor government in the area of EU integration, specifically in the area of legal approximation. It has task of legal approximation, depends how far it is needed in your particular case, but still it can consider draft laws which are important, not all, but which are. It can still have these joint committee meetings related to EU law with other committees, and you have to have really these international tasks specifically related to EU integration, focusing on Brussels and EU member states. While foreign affairs, you should focus to the whole world, or even Russia should be taken into account. While EU integration, it's a bit it's completely different. And then EU committee has this EU information task as well, which is nothing to do with foreign affairs. EU affairs are mainly internal affairs, in a sense that it is domestic affairs. It's an approximation of laws, explaining to your citizens. So therefore, what I can observe is creating new institutions like this Council for EU Integration. It is great, of course, but then if you create a new institution, you have to create new capacity within that secretariat, right? And why do you need to address issues by creating new institutions or new forums, where it's better really to create two separate committees with the powers of the committees? That's my clear answer in terms of that. And then the issue is of staff development of EU Integration Committee. It's completely different competences than you need for foreign affairs. Absolutely. If you work for foreign affairs, you don't care about legal approximation. If you work for EU affairs, and of course you should have skills, you should have contacts in EU member states. It's like really huge daily task for the staff members. And you can better not mix the two tasks. Thank you.
Thank you. Darina, would you like to mention how was it in the Czech case? Why did you establish a separate EU integration committee in the Czech Chamber of Deputies?
Yes, I think the main reason was the legislative approximation tasks, because it was a very big workload with all these draft bills. And actually we still have the Committee on Foreign Affairs, and it deals with the issues of common foreign and security policy of the European Union and with the international treaties, as Imran said, and the EU Affairs Committee deals with the EU legislative proposals.
And last but not least, Eva, could you please tell us a little bit more about the Hungarian case?
Yes, in case of Hungary, at the beginning of the 90s, there was an ad hoc committee, a separate but ad hoc committee on EU integration. Then we officially set up the Committee on European Integration. And I am fully agree with Ilmar's. One very good argumentation is to have a separate committee. EU affairs are not foreign affairs. EU affairs are domestic issues. And as I told you before, the best preparation, the better membership you can gain. So if you follow the basic of the current member state, the basic experience of the current member states, I think that's the best solution. I know only 2 parliaments where out of the 28 member states where there are merged committees, the Maltese and the Luxembourgish parliament, but in their case they are very, very small member states, and they have totally different perspective on the parliamentary work, because the staff is very small, they don't have enough members. I mean, they are small parliaments, so I would really suggest to have a separate committee. This would be the best as an EU member.
And just to add that let's not look into the EU member states now, but Georgia has a separate committee with almost 10 staff members, with a lot of approximation work. The same with Ukraine. Even Armenia has separate EU integration committee. So that's why it's a bit strange that Moldova doesn't have.
Okay, so based on the evidence that were given by our experts, it's a usual practice in the majority of cases, other member states or accession and association countries, to establish a separate EU integration committee, because the reason why to have a separate EU integration committee is that the tasks that are dealt by this committee are completely different of those that are dealt by the Committee on Foreign Policy. I would like to open the session number 2 of our workshop today, and this session will be more practically oriented, and it will focus on how and in which manner the parliamentary working bodies can cooperate in practice. So our experts will explain to you how the parliamentary working bodies cooperate among each other in the parliament, how they cooperate with the government, how they cooperate with the EU institutions, and how they cooperate with the civil society, NGOs, and citizens. So this will be a really practical session where we can deal how the parliamentary working bodies do things in practice. So without any other further ado, I would like to give the floor to Eva to tell us a little bit more about the Hungarian case. Eva, floor is yours.
Thank you for having the floor. First, I would like to talk about the JPC and the Hungarian experience, then the information and communication tasks of the parliament, and thirdly, the civil society, how to involve the civil society into the work. Regarding the JPC of the Hungarian parliament, we had 12 members, and we had the co-chairing system at that time. And we initiated something very special. At that time it was very special, the co-rapporteur system. So each topic was dealt by together. One member from the European Parliament and one member from the Hungarian Parliament. At that time, the Secretariat of the JPC from the Hungarian National Assembly was done by the Office for Foreign Relations. There was in that office, there is a special EU department. So partly we organized all the background materials and all the visits of the JPC, of course in close cooperation with the Secretariat of the Committee on European Integration, because most of the members of the JPC are coming from the Committee on European Integration. just to highlight something, after our accession, one of our members became the chair of the Croatian JPC as a member of the European Parliament. So we could see how we try to help the Croatian Parliament, and we try to be as practical and as helpful as we can. And there is an official, of course, it's a very important official way of negotiating between a national parliament and the European Parliament. But I would like to highlight the informal aspect of these meetings. You can have informal contacts with the rapporteur of your country. These meetings are taken place in Brussels or Strasbourg, so you have the direct contact to meet with them. You can even send your opinion about, the progress country of the Commission of your, the progress report of the Commission of your country, because these members are drafting the report, the country report, because every year the EP reflects on the Commission's progress report of your country. So it can be very, very useful and practical to feed first-handed infos the members of the European Parliament, because they can use it, and this can be a reference in the officially adopted EU EP resolution of your country. So this is how you can support your government's activity with the parliamentary diplomacy, either in a formal way or informal way. Another important issue regarding the JPC is the agenda setting. You shouldn't be afraid of the European Parliament. They are officials as we are. I know them. I'm sitting together with them. They are 100% persons, and sometimes you should struggle with them, but I think at the end of the process the struggle will be used and will be appreciated. So if there is a topic which is interesting and it's in the interest of your own country, be strong enough to put it on the agenda, and be strong enough to do the whole process. These meetings are halfly, so these meetings are organized in every half year, so more or less two meetings per year, and there are also preparatory meetings. So the preparatory meetings can be also very important from the staff point of view. So I would suggest to be aware at the very early stage of the preparation of your really own interest. The second topic is the information and communication tasks of the Parliament, which I would like to highlight. There are internal communication and information tasks and external. Internal is that the staff should somehow prepare background information, EU-related background information to the members. For example, in our case, this is mainly done by the EU Department of the Office for Foreign Relations, which is now a directorate. We prepare every week an EU bulletin, which is a newsletter sent to all the members, highlighting the most important issues of the EU. And we started this EU newsletter to be prepared during the pre-accession phase. At that time, as my Slovak colleague told you, we had a huge burden because there were no internet sources, so we had to really work in a different way. and we had to translate everything. Now you can use some sources of the EU, as well as the Commission, the Council, and the EP, and all the official languages of the European Union. So I think it can be a great help for you. The internal distribution of information should be regular. So not just on ad hoc basis, but you have to create the structure how to inform regularly the members, what kind of documents should be prepared, what kind of events should be organized. During, for example, the pre-accession phase, we had an EU club headed by the chair of the Committee on European Integration, involving the universities, involving civil society, involving, of course, other relevant standing committees. As I told you, the agricultural issue was very important in Hungary, so there were several meetings, high-level meetings organized by the Committee on EU Integration, involving other stakeholders. We had a referendum on the accession, and before the referendum, the Parliament organized a roadshow in different cities of our country, involving the national parliamentarians. So we selected a topic. For example, in a city, the mining was very a huge issue and question. So we went there, and we invited the members of the European Parliament as well as a guest to have a speech and have a direct contact with the citizens on the spot, and not just from the TV and from the newspaper. So I think this was very, very a useful method, because of course the accession is an ongoing process. The EU is always an ongoing structure. It changes a lot during the years, and of course there are several fears coming from the citizens that, okay, how my life would be changed if we will be the members of the European Union. So the Parliament have the role to decrease or diminish these fears. So the fears should be explained for the citizens, and I think these kind of campaigns, roadshows on the spot in different places of the country are very useful. Regarding the civil society is an important help for the Parliament. During the pre-accession phase, we had a special office who are dealing with especially the civil society. They had a huge register of the Hungarian civil societies. They had regularly and daily contact with those NGOs, and they provided the help for the standing committees to have the contacts with the relevant NGOs and civil societies. And of course, this office, at that time, it was part of the Speaker's cabinet. This office could organize several hearings, meetings as well in the Parliament, so they could involve the citizens into the Parliament. I mean, not just the building itself, but in the decision-making process of the Parliament. I would like to highlight just quite few thoughts about the administrative support. During the pre-accession phase, the National Assembly recruited so many people, first for the Secretariat of the Committee on EU Integration, and then into the EU Department of the Office for Foreign Relations. At the end of the accession process, we established a system which is still being used, and the number of the staff is almost the same as it was in the pre-accession period, but we gradually increased the number of the staff at both sides, as I told you, the Committee on EU Integration and the EU Department as well. And another important issue is the language knowledge of the staff. Those staff members who are dealing with the EU is really appreciated to have a solid knowledge of English or French or both. It is very useful in longer term of the country. Do I have time or not? Or 1 minute? Okay, just one of my hobbies is the role of the parliamentary diplomacy. It's not because I'm strictly saying the same things, but I really experience in my daily work how you can help your country with the parliamentary diplomacy, and in this phase of your country you can really use it. You can go to different meetings, interparliamentary meetings. Of course you should be proactive, because in some cases you have to send a letter to the chairperson, for example in case of the COSAC, which is the meeting of the chairpersons of the committees dealing with European affairs. They meet twice a year during each presidency term. Each presidency has to organize this meeting. So I think if you send a letter to the presidency country's EU Affairs Committee chair, you can be in the flow, you can be in the way how the other parliamentarians are thinking about this and that. And of course officially you are there and as an observer, but you can take the floor, you can tell whatever you want, and you can represent the interest of your country. And of course there are informal side events on these different meetings, so you can grab the attention of the national parliamentarians about your country. So thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much especially for this practical advice that the parliamentary diplomacy is useful either in a formal way or during these informal meetings, especially interparliamentary presidency events. So now I would like to give the floor to Eva Kicinova from the National Council of the Slovak Republic to tell us a little bit more about the Slovak case.
Thank you very much. I will continue with the ideas my colleague said about especially the parliamentary diplomacy and the dialogue, parliamentary dialogue, the dialogue of your representatives of your parliament and the representative of the EU. I would like to stress how it was important in our case and how it definitely should be in your case. Concerning the parliamentary diplomacy, I would like to suggest or invite you to invite the ambassadors of the delegation of the European Commission to the meetings of either the European Integration Committee or your new platform, the joint committee you have established, and ask for the information, ask what is going on, what are the processes running in the EU institution, etc., so that you are informed and you inform the representatives of the EU institutions, vice versa, and ask also invite ambassadors of the countries holding the presidency, current presidencies of the Council of the European Union. This is what we were doing. At the beginning of every half a year, the new presidency of the Council of the European Union was starting. We invited the ambassador of whatever country and asked what will be the priorities of your country during your presidency, how you see these integration procedures and the attitudes towards the integration of the countries to the EU. So these were very important parliamentary tools. How you get the information about what's going on in the EU institutions and the EU as a whole, as such, and then again cooperate and coordinate your activities also with your partner committees in your neighboring countries. Or share experience. We, for example, our countries had a very good experience working together with the so-called Visegrad four group countries, the Czech Republic, Hungary, Slovak Republic, and Poland. We had the European Integration Committee meetings at least every year, and the European Affairs Committee meetings, and the cooperation continues. We share the best practices, we share the information, and we use really these parliamentary platforms for this kind of sharing the best practices among our parliament. So this is what I would suggest you, and I'm not really sure if you are already attending the COSAC meetings, if you are invited as the observers, but this was also a very good platform for us to share the experience and to discuss with our partners of the EU member states during the COSAC meetings, and our members of parliament were attending these meetings, and so they could see what's going on, what are the discussions running at that particular period of time in the EU issues, EU affairs, how it should be the role of the national parliaments. It was also a very important source of information for our parliamentarians, members of parliament, but also for the staff of the EU Integration Committee, also the legislative people from the legislative department, departments of information analysis were also attending these kind of meetings. So I would suggest also to make use of these possibilities as much as possible. Well, we can skip the slide and go to the JPC, joint committee, parliamentary committee of the European Union and our case and the Slovak Republic. Also, of course, this JPC had this added value in the pre-accession period of time. In our case, the committee met 15 times during this pre-accession period, and the meetings were held not only in capital city of Slovakia in Bratislava, of course in Brussels, but we had also the meetings of the JPC in other cities of Slovakia, for example in Košice, which is eastern part of Slovakia, so that also the people from the distant regions are acquainted, are informed about these processes which are not going on only in the capital city of our country. So this was also a very important added value for our citizens, for informing them about the whole integration process, that this JPC meeting, that the members of the European Parliament were really coming to the eastern part of Slovakia to give the information to the also to the citizens on this region of Slovakia. And of course the JPC was discussing different aspects of accession negotiations, the pre-accession strategy, the political, economic reforms. We also had special agriculture issues in our country as well as in Hungary. It was also one of the big part of the discussions of the JPC. and whatever actual issues there were and concerning the integration process. And I would like to highlight one special meeting of JPC, and it was in the time I mentioned in previous presentation when the Slovakia was excluded from that group of countries. So the JPC in doing one particular meeting advised the European institutions that they should evaluate again the situation in the Slovakia, and they sent that recommendation that there are already the political barriers between the Slovak Republic and the EU are overcome, that they should review again the position of the Slovakia, and again to start the accession negotiations. So that was one particular meeting which had big political influence and consequence on our also the public opinion and our the attitudes of the whole country and our citizens toward the EU, the integration process as such. Was that one I wanted to highlight particularly. We can now switch to another slide. What was the role of the Parliament in informing the general public about the association process? Well, the special role was concerning the communication strategy towards the accession to the EU. This communication strategy was adapted at the level of the government, but the Parliament also played a crucial role. It was controlling the government if this communication strategy is running well. It was giving also it added value, as the parliamentarians were discussing in the how this communication strategy is running in a practice. How if the campaign is sufficient enough, if the citizens are getting enough information from the governmental the ministries from their side. And we have created also the Parliamentary Commission for preparation of the referendum. The referendum is also very important to mention, because before the accession we had to hold the referendum according to the Constitution, and the referendum had to be positive. Otherwise, it was a precondition in the Constitution. Otherwise, we would have a serious problem if the people in the referendum would vote no. So that was very, very important to work very hard on the government, parliamentary level, all across the whole political spectrum, to activate the people to give as much positive campaign as possible, so that the referendum will have positive results. Fortunately, it was the only valid referendum in the history of Slovakia, because there were the 50+1% people attending the referendum, which is the precondition according to the Constitution. If you have less than 50, the referendum results are not valid. So we really needed to motivate the people to come and to vote for the EU membership. So that's why the role of the Parliament was very crucial in this pre-referendum period. And there were the different different campaigns or periods of campaigns, the informative press mobilization campaigns, etc. And what is interesting, that the leaders, political leaders, decided that they will not hold a separate pre-referendum campaigns, each political party, but they will all together, all the leaders of political parties, with all ministers, they will lead one single campaign under one logo of the EU accession. And they all agreed, and it helped successfully accomplish this accession period, and it resulted in the positive results of the referendum as well. And what we have established two special platforms how we informed the general public about the European Union issues. It is something maybe a little comparable to the roadshows what Hungary had, but we called it the national conventions. It was a platform where not only parliamentarians but also representatives of the executive, that means the ministers, deputy prime minister for European integration, for foreign affairs, but also other stakeholders, the academic community, representatives of church, trade unions, interest associations, NGOs, local regional governments were gathered together. They had these public discussions and about whatever actual issues going on the EU level. There were two platforms. First was the convention, or national convention about the European future of Slovak Republic in the EU, because it was established in the time when there was the discussion about the European future, about the constitutional treaty, European Union constitutional treaty. So we want to put also our opinions of the Slovak Republic about the European future. How is the position, our position of the Slovak Republic to the European Convention, even though we were not yet members of the European Union, but we show our interest that we are interested in what's going on in the EU, how we want to put our our opinions and added value to the discussions from our point of view. So we were discussing the European the future of the European Constitution, even though we were not yet members of the European Union, and we approved this convention, the national convention, also some kind of recommendations toward the EU institution concerning the European future and the European Constitution. And one more minute, then there were also discussions during the national convention about the European Union in general. There were the many meetings held in Bratislava in different countries, and there were different thematic working groups which met and discussed the particular issues such as agriculture and etc. So that it was kind of comparable to the roadshow, but at a little bit different platform. So, and this is all I wanted to tell you.
Thank you very much. We can see that the experience of Hungary and Slovak Republic is quite similar, that the importance of parliamentary diplomacy was highlighted, and also the necessity of having a clear communication strategy of the many positive results of the European integration and association to the citizens and to the NGOs. And now I would like to give the floor to Darina for her introductory remarks.
Thank you. So I will start also with our communication strategy, because as I was listening to Eva, I identified many common points in our country's experience. Because our country, we also had the communication strategy of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but the Parliament did not have its own communication strategy. So its role was rather in oversighting the government while implementing the communication strategy of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I have translated for you one program invitation to a Committee on European Integration. I don't know if you have it in your folders. There is also one point that the committee dealt with this communication strategy. However, the committee also did not adopt any resolutions giving any recommendations concerning this communication strategy. However, what was interesting in my country was that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs established the advisory body for the communication strategy, and the MPs were members to this advisory body, which was quite, it was discussed whether it is compatible with the constitutional repartition of powers, because the Parliament was supposed to oversight the implementing of communication strategy, and this was rather like direct participation. But as it was mentioned by Eva, it was also good to have only one unique unique communication strategy, and the MPs were this way also involved in its implementation. And in addition, the MPs were also members of commission, you know, if tenders, that there were some calls for tenders to assign some contracts for the supply of services within the communication strategy. So the MPs were sometimes also members of these commissions for selection of a suitable companies or candidates for provision of these services. So this is quite specific. And I would also like to highlight the importance of parliamentary diplomacy, because of course the Chamber of Deputies also were involved in JPC, but our MPs were a little bit discouraged about its competences, because it was rather informal forum and it did not have competency to adopt binding resolutions. And so I think in the Czech Republic maybe its potential could have been used more, because the MPs were rather discouraged by its by lack of binding competencies, and the emphasis was put on bilateral meetings, and these bilateral meetings were focused on promoting Czech memberships in the European Union. So we were somehow trying to convince all member states that our membership would be beneficial. For example, there have been might have been some doubts, for example, from the point of view of France, that the influence of Germany will broaden when the Czech Republic is admitted to the EU, because the Czech economy is somehow linked to the German economy, or there were some doubts from the countries in the south of Europe that maybe the financial support from the cohesion funds will be more redirected to the countries of Central and Eastern Europe. So we used the parliamentary diplomacy tools to convince and that Czech Republic is ready to fully that it is good that the Czech Republic will be a member of the EU. Then we also participated in COSAC meetings since 1998 as an observer, so we had also no voting rights, but it was also interesting for our MPs, and there was also a legal base in the rules of procedure of COSAC for this at that time. Yes, so that could be all.
Thank you very much. Maybe a little bit short remark when it comes to the COSAC meetings. I think that according to the rules of procedure, COSAC, the member states and the candidate countries are invited, but based on the letter of intent, or any other country in Europe's southern and eastern neighborhoods, especially those in Eastern Partnership countries, can ask the presidency country parliament for giving them guest status, so they can be invited as observers to the COSAC meetings as well. So this might be maybe a relevant information for you. Based on our experience during the Slovak presidency, which was conducted recently, we also received some letters from the countries that were not directly invited to the COSAC meetings, but our parliament gave them the guest status, so they were observers during the COSAC meetings, also during the presidency of the Slovak Republic. So now I would like to give the floor to Ilmars for his short remarks.
Thank you very much. If we may go on the PowerPoint slides to the part 2. Thank you very much. So this part will be related actually to mainly to the internal actors in Latvia, interrelations between the parliament and the other bodies which are responsible for EU integration. But before going to that, just to confirm that Latvian experiences with the Joint Parliamentary Committee, COSAC, international diplomacy was quite the same. So firstly, as a JPC, the Secretariat of European Affairs Committee served as Secretariat to the Joint Parliamentary Committee. So I was myself a secretary. So the Secretariat of the EU Affairs Committee served as Secretariat of Latvian Parliament's delegation to the European Convention. So I was a secretary also for that one. Then about JPC working methods, so we relied on this rapporteur system, which means for every item on the agenda of JPC, we had someone responsible from Latvian Parliament to report on that, and someone from MEPs, from the European Parliament delegation. And we relied on the information prepared not by ourselves, but we always requested, like at least 1 month before the JPC meeting, information either through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or directly from the sectoral ministries. And it was always a must that all topics on the agenda of JPC are covered by the basic information and by the talking points. So it was always like that. Members of Parliament which went to joint parliamentary committee meetings were always prepared. We have also some preparatory meetings at least 2 or 3 times before the actual meeting of JPC took place. And we used to work directly with the rapporteur for Latvia, so why it is important to get better, let's say, opinion of the European Parliament, especially when it comes to the division of the groups, like our Slovak colleague mentioned. I've already told you that unfortunately Slovakia was in the second group of accession, so Latvia was also in the second together with Lithuania, while Estonia was in the first. But we did not care so much, I mean, are we in the first or the second? The overall problem with this division into groups was this very counterproductive spirit of cooperation. So we used to compare ourselves with Estonia and Lithuania and who is doing better. So the speed was what mattered, not the quality. And this is what I really advise you to avoid, like not to compare yourself with the whole, let's say, Ukraine is doing or Georgia, what is structures they have established. You have your own accession way to go. And the spirit of competition is counterproductive, really. I mean, we suffered so much in accession negotiations because we wanted to close as many chapters as possible that we did not pay attention to the substance, but to the speed. And what mattered, how many chapters we closed. So at a certain point, we discovered that we are better than Estonians even, so we closed more chapters than the ones who are in the first group. But exceeded on the same date. What matters again, this is conditions on which you exceed. So negotiations, the same as, let's say, negotiating the DCFTA or, let's say, broader sense, your association agreement. So you also probably competed with Ukraine and Georgia, so everyone wanted to sign at a particular date, you know, in this particular summit. But what mattered actually, what is in the agreement, because now you have to implement. This is a real problem. I mean, not the speed, but the substance, because you will not join EU faster than you are ready. And you shouldn't really compete with someone to just prove to yourself or to your citizens that we are better than someone. So EU integration is a tool to improve the work of, and, let's say, the living in your country. It's not a competition tool, in any case, to compete with someone else. And what was also very specific in this international diplomacy that we worked significantly with the European Commission, both in Brussels and with the delegation, namely to supply updated information about the progress in the Parliament. So which law has been adopted or which law has been adopted at first or the second reading. As you know, this usual practice of the governments, I'm not speaking about Moldova in particular, but in general, so often the government considers that they have fulfilled their tasks by submitting the draft to the Parliament. So then they say, okay, we can report to Brussels, great. And then the Parliament says, oh, it's in bad quality, maybe we need 1 or 2 years to work on it. If it's, let's say, in Latvian case, it was maritime law, which was creating a big problem. So we have, you know, the Jūrmala seacoast. We had a huge shipping company, but we did not have maritime law. And it took for the Parliament to draft the law, I think it took like 2 or 3 years, because there were no expert who knows the subject in Latvia, because the Soviet type law was absolutely outdated. And the government did not have anyone, any civil servant who had any clue about what the maritime law means. So then the Parliament took it over, but every year we saw in the progress report, okay, Latvia is not able to adopt very important law, which is Maritime Code, which wasn't really important at that time, but if you promise something to EU, so you must keep to your promises. It's better not to promise if you're not sure. And that's why you have to liaise with, firstly, EU delegation, colleagues here, and to say, okay, our capacities are this and that, so I think in this year we can adopt this and that laws. We shouldn't make big political statements, instead having working relations, and not only with the EU delegation, but with relevant DGs, let's say DG competition, for example. We had serious troubles with so-called free economic zones. I guess probably you may have such free economic zones also in Moldova. This is basically the issue where you don't have to pay corporate tax. So in Latvia, we have had before accession 4 free economic areas or zones. 3 of them were the seaports like Latvia, Riga, Ventspils and Liepāja. And everyone in these free zones were afraid of EU integration because they thought that we will have to abolish this favorable tax regime. So it took like about 2 or 3 years to convince that we should really comply with the EU requirements in the area of competition and state aid. In order to comply with the requirements, we had to do, some kind of promotion in Latvia, and also to take the representatives, the lawyers, namely, from these free economic areas to relevant DG in the European Commission, where they were told by Commission, so they did not trust the Parliament, but they trusted Brussels officials who said, look, if you do these state aid rules properly, you can even benefit much longer and in a better conditions, actually. So that's about international diplomacy, but now I will focus a little bit about institutional setup, just the main points. So in the government, our main cooperation partner was European Integration Bureau. Later, it was abolished, unfortunately, by a very volunteer decision of the Prime Minister at that time, actually 1 year before accession. So it functioned perfectly. It was our best ever cooperation partner in the government, but suddenly it was decided actually that there's no need for it anymore. Also, it had legislative database, it had EU library, it had a lot of experts, like up to 20 good lawyers who were also helping the Parliament. So, but of course, 1 year before accession, we were considering ourselves very ready, so, and there was no need for such institution, and functions were transformed to the Ministry of Justice. But only the functions, not the budget, and not the staff. Because at that time, Ministry of Justice wasn't, as it is now, for example, it's really a professional institution, but at that time they did not have capacity to deal with the EU approximation. Neither the staff of Integration Bureau wanted to work there because the ministry did not have capacity, and Integration Bureau was considered to be like very high profile institution which was directly under supervision of the Prime Minister, so it has had even higher level, let's say, of subordination than the line ministries. So 1 year before accession it was abolished, unfortunately. Then if we go to the main slide, I will go by institution, actually. So, European Integration Council, this is rather common practice in the pre-accession or accession countries to have some coordinative body, the highest political coordinative body, which should normally include also representatives of Parliament. In our case, it was called European Integration Council. We can say it was a small cabinet of ministers consisting of, let's say, about 70% of ministers, chair of EU Affairs Committee, and I think some other representatives from civil society were there, but I don't really remember if it was the case. But what is important as the chair of European Affairs Committee was a member, or if he or she couldn't participate in the particular meeting, so she or he had rights to appoint another member of Parliament to represent European Affairs Committee. But what is important, not to have the, let's say, voting rights, but to have observer and advisory capacity. Because if you are voting in such institutions like National European Integration Council, then you as a representative of legislator are taking responsibility on behalf of this executive branch, and this shouldn't be the case, so this is better to avoid. So what else did the council do? So the council was actually approving the main priorities for Latvia, including the national plan for the key adoption. It was political monitoring institution about the implementation of national plan for key adoption. Of course, the parliament also did monitoring, but this highest level governmental body was to monitor the plan was the Integration Council, while Integration Bureau was the one who was responsible to develop the plan, to draft. So then the council also but also in practice decided how to distribute EU assistance related to EU integration. It wasn't done only by, let's say, the cabinet of ministers or by the Ministry of Finance, so in pre-accession phase you may have different models. But in Latvia it was decided by the National Integration Council. And then what the most important task was to make the prioritization, which step should be first and which is second. This is what is probably crucial for Moldova, which law to approximate as a priority one and which can wait a little bit. So in our case it was done not by the line ministries, but at the highest level it was done by the Integration Council. So let's move to the next slide. European Integration Bureau. So as I already told you, this was really an excellent institution and the best ever cooperation partner for European Affairs Committee. What they did, they drafted the national program for key adoption. So their opinion about compatibility was obligatory in order for the draft law to be submitted to the parliament. Before, let's say, positive assessment of conformity, the law couldn't even be submitted to the parliament because, well, if it's not in conformity with the EU laws, then it should be worked still by the government in order to bring it to the necessary conformity. Then it also helps the line ministries and also the parliament when there were some needs to transpose EU law. So line ministries may ask assistance from the European Integration Bureau. So from the lawyers, they also were managing EU assistance projects aimed to legal approximation, so they could ask also EU experts to get involved in the legal drafting process. It was also responsible to maintain EU legislative database, which I already told you we had access to, and it was responsible to inform general public and also civil servants in the government about the EU integration. So 1 year before accession it was abolished and these functions were transformed to the Ministry of Justice. Then let's go to the next main player, which has actually equal role to play. It is Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So Integration Bureau, was the main institution for internal coordination. While for external coordination, it is, of course, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. To negotiate, to discuss, communicate with EU institutions, member states, to prepare information for the national contribution to the progress report, to develop yearly EU information strategy, to develop report to the Parliament about EU integration. These were the major tasks for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But the major one was, of course, accession negotiations. So European Integration Bureau had nothing to do with accession negotiations. They mainly took care about internal homeworks. While Ministry of Foreign Affairs was responsible to negotiate good conditions for Latvia to access the EU. And they were also a very good partner for the European Affairs Committee and the Parliament itself, because we were involved, not we, but the European Affairs Committee in advisory capacity. The chair was involved in negotiation delegation, and all negotiation chapters had to have an approval, or so-called mandate, from the European Affairs Committee. And very briefly, let's go to the next slide. Council of Senior Officials. So this was the main, and still is, main coordinating body among civil servants. staff of European Affairs Committee were also members of the Senior Official Council. And Senior Official Council main task at the time of EU integration was practically to discuss problems and to divide the tasks of the ministries and other institutions in terms of legal approximation and in particular related to national program for the acquis adoption. Often when you have to approximate the law, the big issue who will do it and who will appoint the necessary ministry or agency or civil servant. So sometimes you can solve it at the level of civil servants, and this was the level, Council of Senior Officials, when we saw the new directive or whatever task to be performed, it was discussed in this forum. So with participation of the parliament representatives. So this is why we were always informed about the actual problems and challenges, and we could also provide the feedback about the status of particular laws in the parliament. So we may ask from our colleagues some assistance to the sectoral committees if such assistance were needed. So again, this transparency, openness, exchange of information were saving a lot of time, energy and money for the parliament. So if we needed something and if this assistance was available within the government or EU project, so it was available also for us, for the parliament. And then the last slide is what were the instruments for planning and monitoring EU accession. The first and the most important, of course, was the National Program for EU Integration, also called acquis adoption. So, Integration Bureau was the institution to draft it, to monitor it technically. Politically, it was monitored by the European Integration Council and by the Parliament. And this was an excellent tool for European Affairs Committee to have concrete government bodies like ministries accountable, because if there is a plan, there are the dates, there is responsible institution. Even we had a budget planned, so it was forbidden to include anything, any activity in the acquis adoption plan if there is no budget available. So either, let's say, EU support, pre-accession aid or national budget. Of course, it was like rough estimate only, but still, the estimates were there. It was really excellent tool how to monitor. And before that tool, it was difficult. I mean, based on what we can have ministries accountable and for what, if there is no plan with deadlines. So as far as I know, there is a bit similar plan for association agreement implementation in Moldova, so that can probably also serve as a good basis for monitoring of the progress. Then we have specific instruments, so-called strategy for integration in the EU, but this was mainly related to the work of Ministry of Foreign Affairs and accession negotiations, not to domestic preparations, but how do we deal with the EU institutions and EU member states. And this plan served as the document to be debated at annual EU debates within the plenary. So firstly, it was sent to the EU Affairs Committee, then we prepared the committee prepared the annual debates. Because in order to have the debate, you have to have some document to be debated. To have debates and without focusing on some particular document, that's a bit problematical. Then, European Commission Annual Progress Report was a tool to monitor our achievements, and Latvia's contribution to the Commission Progress Report, where European Affairs Committee played really significant role to provide updated information about status of draft laws or policy or decisions in the Parliament, because often the government does not have complete oversight about all activities of the Parliament. But we did not write specific information to someone, but we provided based on peer-to-peer contacts to relevant person in the EU delegation or to relevant person in the European Parliament or relevant person in the European Commission in Brussels. So we didn't produce a really huge document, we just send very updated and tailored information based on request or on our own initiative. So it functioned pretty well. So Latvia's progress reports were not bad, I would say, comparing with some others. Also, thanks to updated information about the activities of the Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So before opening the discussion, I would like to briefly summarize what was highlighted by our experts during this session. So basically, in all 4 cases, the Parliament utilized a proactive approach, not only when it comes to the parliamentary diplomacy, but also when it comes to the information of the civil society, NGOs and citizens about the many positive results of EU association and integration process. So it was highlighted by the colleagues that the parliaments in their cases had regular contacts with EU delegation, staff members, or even with the ambassador of EU in their respective country. Besides, they also engaged a little bit with the parliamentary diplomacy activities during interparliamentary conferences, which are conducted under the framework of the presidency in the Council of the European Union. So they engaged with informal diplomacy contacts with the member states. And all of the 4 national parliaments used the huge potential that the JPC with the European Parliament had. So in practice, they were in regular contacts with the JPC, and even they provided updated information or an opinion of the Parliament to the country report, which was submitted by the government and by the European Commission. And last but not least, the parliaments in these 4 countries understood very quickly that their role is to engage in EU awareness raising activities. So they took proactive approach when it comes to the information function internally. So they had some kind of platforms or information strategies or even information centers for the members of parliaments, and also to communicate those many positive results of EU association and integration to the public and to the civil society. So to communicate the benefits of EU association to the civil society. So this was the clear message that was delivered during the second session of our workshops by these 4 national case studies. And now I would like to open the discussion for your question, remarks. Maybe we can, yeah. So any question, remarks? I know that maybe you might be interested in the questions that were already raised by during the first workshop, whether to report to the European Parliament, and how we know that in your case there's some kind of initiative of establishing a reporting system to the European Parliament. And during the last workshop, you asked experts whether this was the case in their countries and how they did it. So maybe this might be the case also here. So if you would like to ask any specific information, how to cooperate with EU institutions, so please, this is the right time. So if there are no any questions, comments, so, okay, so I would like to then close the workshop if you don't have any specific questions to this session and to our experts. So first of all, I would like to inform you that our experts will be available here in the afternoon in our project twinning office, number 506, on the 5th floor in the annex to the building. And if you are interested in having discussion with them, so you are cordially invited, but please let me know that you would like to discuss with the experts in person in the afternoon in our project office, so we can arrange a meeting for you. The second thing that I would like to mention is the fact that this is one of the series of workshops that we are conducting under the framework of the component 1. So in February next year, we will have the 3rd workshop, which will deal with practical issues connected with parliamentary administration. So the colleagues from 4 national parliaments will come to share experience and best practices with you, how to be a good civil servant in the parliament and how to help the members of the parliament, the members of the European Integration Committee especially. So you will be invited also for this workshop in due time. And last but not least, I would like to kindly ask you to fill in our evaluation forms, which you have in your folders. This is a really valuable feedback for us, so we can accommodate your future needs in our future offerings for seminars and workshops, which will be done under the framework of this twinning project. And last but not least, I would like to thank you very much for your active participation. I would like to thank our short-term experts for their presence here and for having a very interesting and useful presentation here today. I would like to also thank our project assistants and our colleagues from the Strategic Development Unit for smooth organization of this workshop. And of course, I would like to also thank our interpreters for their work done today. So thank you very much. And if you are interested in individual consultations with experts today afternoon, so please let me know so we can arrange it for you. So thank you very much and see you during our future twinning project activities.